Welcome back to Sika Strength. Welcome back to the Sika Stan news show. Today's news show is brought to you by the newsletter. And because Kolbe is up first with his squat, you have to subscribe to the weightlifting section of the newsletter. Very subtle advertising. In fact, it's been going for several months now and we haven't advertised yet at all. It's all information. Dara writes it all. He curates it. It's obviously information from both of us. No ghostwriters. So it's good, honest to God, training information. I'm not religious, but so reading some of those newsletters would make you feel like you're having an epiphany sometimes.
A coming to God moment.
First up, the weightlifting gods. First up, we've got Kolbe, the American sensation, busted onto the scene last year sometime. We were early adopters. We were innovators on Kolbe because we had him doing a front squat at like 250 2 years ago. And we were like, who is this guy? Then he came out into Worlds last year with Team USA, was close to getting bronze. So he's been playing American football since he's 5. Dylan, actually, Dozer Weightlifter, has an episode with him where they kind of go through some training. And we've got this 300 kilo double on the back squat. Some notable features include 300 kilos for 2 reps, high bar, excellent technique, no knee sleeves, but the size of his
Stunning
quads.
Stunning gym environment.
And this is, once again, squatflation. Squatflation is a real thing.
Squatflation's going on, isn't it?
300 means nothing anymore. Everyone can do it, apparently, now. Ain't shit.
My squat feels like a box of money I kept under the bed since the 80s, and now it's worth nothing.
I'm not sure. I think my squat's worth like 260 now, is it? I think with inflation.
I don't know.
I can't even afford to buy a house with my squat.
It is. It's such a good-looking squat as well. Like, in American weightlifting lore, there's an undercurrent constantly in the background that says, imagine if all the American football players did weightlifting. And I think what you're seeing here is, like, Kolbe did play, was it high school and college ball?
I'm not sure.
He definitely played high school football. Like, this is what you see when you see, like, in all countries you have funneling into your ideal sports environments, right? You funneling in Ireland into GAA, soccer, rugby. It's where the best athletes go, and then the other athletes are kind of left over. Once they retire out, they'll go and do one of the other smaller sports. It's always the question in the States about the massive proportion of people who do basketball, American football and baseball. So it is great to see weightlifting getting bigger in the US. It's great to see more talented athletes getting into the sport rather than it being more of the kind of fringe sport it's always been known as.
So the real question here is, do we think he'll develop into a future medalist to compete with people like Akbar, with Miso and other lifters, Archim, for example? And I'll give you the prediction right now is that we don't know. You just don't know how progression happens in weightlifting. Very often we've seen lots of people have talented throughout the years, both nationally, domestic, internationally. And sometimes you think this person is going to be amazing, and then they don't progress where you think. So I'm not saying this is the case for Kolbe. It's just really hard to say. He could add another 20 kilos to his lifts, or we might just see that progression meet a hard stop. So time will tell. It's great for American weightlifting. It's good for everyone's weightlifting internationally. The more high quality lifters we have doing weightlifting is good for the sport. So I'm optimistic, and these squats, if nothing else, is one fantastic squat and brings him closer to the mythical 320.
Yeah, he's definitely, the strength numbers are all there, and it's moving incredibly quickly as well. A lot of the time you see those overinflated strength numbers, whether it's people coming from different sports or from powerlifting, squat depth mightn't be there, or the dynamism mightn't be there, or the speed of the barbell isn't there. It's definitely here in Kolbe's case.
Now, speaking of American weightlifting talent, we've got, I'm going to say, the GOAT of American weightlifting. Is that fair to say? Maybe at least since the 90s, you know, you had people like Wes Barnett and some of the earlier lifters, but she's certainly this American weightlifting generation's GOAT. And this is Olivia Reeves. Kind of needs no introduction. Olympic medalist, world champion, gold medalist at the Olympics, scaring the Chinese lifters, you know, all round.
Yeah, massively dominant international performer. One thing I always think of when I look at Olivia's squat is that Olivia has really, really good timing and tempo in the squats. Every time I see her squatting, it's never this massive dive bomb into the bottom. It's never super slow as she's approaching the bottom. Just really good tempo and speed throughout. I feel like if we looked at 10 of her last heaviest squats, they'll all look absolutely identical. There's never a point where the squat becomes super slow and she kind of grinds through it. It's almost Lasha-esque. Like you hear it all the time about like what's the heaviest weight Lash ever squatted. Lash always squats really heavy weights and makes them look like they're incredibly light, and I feel like Olivia's in the same camp here.
This is 205 kilos for a triple, and it's in her characteristically excellent squatting style. She's notable for that lower frequency training for international weightlifting, which is a rarity. Even in comparison to what the Chinese team, she's lower, which we recently discovered is quite low frequency in comparison to international weightlifting. So again, there's a few ways to skin the cat as long as you're obeying those good principles of progression, but 205 for a triple, excellent reps, superb. Now, sticking with squats here in the start of the weightlifting section of the new show, we've got a crowd favourite, Lee Sang-yong.
Woo!
So, not much of him in the last couple of months, but we're back with him seemingly getting in shape. Not that he ever gets out of shape, I would imagine, with a 220 kilos by 6 reps and a mystery 65% recovery in the bottom. Now, is that some form of measurement from some kind of wrist wrap? Don't say the brand there. I could see you about to give free advertising, but there's no free advertising on the new show. There's no advertising at all, actually, in the new show. 220 by 6. I don't know what the 65% recovery means. If anyone can read Korean, feel free to let us know what that might say.
That's actually the translated version of Korean.
The translated is just more Korean. Apparently it's a very innovative written language. But that aside, Lee Sang-yong's squat quality is obviously massive. Very notable characteristic is he's squatting in New Balance runners and not weightlifting shoes.
It's a strange move, isn't it? When I looked at this first, I was wondering were they New Balance kind of weightlifting shoes that had come on the market that we hadn't seen yet. I think with Lee's squat, Lee never involves ankle mobility too much, right? He's never pushing his knees forward a massive amount. He externally rotates his hips a lot. He pushes his knees out to the side. And so definitely for someone like him, he can get away with his feet being a bit flatter than somebody who, like myself, might need a bit more help around the ankle mobility side of things.
The Korean squat, the South Korean style of squat, is very notably ass and quad dominant, posterior and anterior dominant. They're very strong backs. They do lots of assistance work. They do lots of variations of the pulls and the lifts and the squats, and they built just all around units like this. So we get this whole body unit in cohesion squatting like this, and it's one of the reasons that you should always do your assistance work, which is very, very important if you want to maximize your quality of your strength work. Next, we've got Martina Chiacchio. Nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. With a 100 kilo snatch.
The Italian team obviously have had their ups and downs in the last couple of years. We're all massively following along with them. There's a lot of people really invested in them as they went to the Olympics, and I think it was probably a disappointing performance, as many of them will have said. Definitely there is a huge crop of talented young lifters over there. There's definitely a huge amount of kind of want and drive for weightlifting to get better there, so it's great to see. In this case, the real standout point is that catch position is just insanely low. Like it is, she says die trying in the Instagram post, but it is an absolutely balls to the wall attempt to catch that.
Another nation that likes their snatch grip deadlifts and accessory work, and you can see that in the stability and rigidity of her back as she's pulling, and then that plays a role both in the pulling and the catch position, which is, again, do your assistance work. Now here we've got Kira McManus Owen with a 120 kilo split jerk from the rack. Now obviously 120 kilos is a massive jerk, but she's 15 years old. She's not even a weightlifter. She is doing the CrossFit Open. She's 7 days out, which is a thing we've seen quite frequently over the years. CrossFit seems to have picked up some of these amazing talents in CrossFit, and we'll just see them the odd time display some incredible feats of strength or weightlifting ability, specifically among these teenagers. We had the New Zealand teenager last year, I think she power cleaned like 110 or 105, and then we've got here Kira, for example, jerking 120 kilos from rack in very weightlifter-esque style. Maybe she's a dual sport athlete, but what is definitely the case is that this is a massive jerk for a 15-year-old.
It's insane, and it's not even... So 120 kilos is insane, 15 years old is insane, But then when you consider how good that jerk is, how stable the jerk is, we talk about it all the time. The lighter weight class athletes, the youth athletes, their stability overhead tends not to be on par with the senior athletes. It's just they haven't developed. They don't have as much muscle. They don't have as much muscle coordination as the senior athletes do. And so at heavier weights, they tend to look a little less stable. In this case, it is rock solid overhead, really, really good positions, great drive through the barbell, but that overhead stability is genuinely unbelievable.
Next, we've got some pictures from Kurt Album of the Chinese national team doing some high-intensity interval training. Now, I hope you caught the episode where we did with Squat Jerk Journalists, where we looked at the Chinese national team program, and then I did a subsequent breakdown of that after. But one of the aspects that Yelan touched on was the fact that the Chinese team are doing all year round essentially is some interval training or high-intensity cardio. We can see some battle ropes, we can see some skipping here, we can see some bodyweight core exercises, some push-ups, a bike erg or a watt bike, and we've got a little bit of the reading here. And they are genuinely pushing this into that high-intensity cardio. We can see some max heart rates of 179, 175, 168, which is obviously incredibly high. Then we've probably either glucose, oxygen, or lactate measuring. We're not exactly sure which one this is here. Lactate actually is, does it say there?
Lactate would make more sense.
Lactic acid data. And then we've just got them absolutely goosed at the end.
I love the two testing measures here. The first is the heart rate monitor. Now, heart rate data is very, very useful for conditioning pieces, particularly when you're doing conditioning pieces under duress or forcing a coach or a coach forcing you to do it. The problem with high intensity interval work a lot of the time is everybody's going to be tired, everybody's going to appear tired, everybody will exhibit symptoms of tiredness without necessarily knowing how hard they're pushing themselves, right? So on a watt bike, you're going to have the wattage, you're going to have the output, you'll know what that wattage is and how hard they're pushing relatively. But if you have a 110 kilo athlete versus a 70 kilo athlete, those wattage outputs are going to be drastically different. What you're left with then is a need for a kind of internal measure of how hard somebody's working, and heart rate is a really good one. Now, interestingly on this, when we look at their relative heart rates, one of them's red and the rest of them are orange. They're all very, very similar in terms of the actual BPMs. But what they're probably working off here is a theoretical measure of max heart rate. So they more than likely say you're 30 years old, you get your max heart rate by doing 220 minus your age. So your max heart rate is 190, and then you're working at 170, which is 90% of that one rep or one top end heart rate. Now, you can make this more accurate by actually doing top-end heart rate data, but athletes have been known to skew this data slightly by just not pushing themselves quite so hard. And certainly in an environment like this, we have a lot of athletes coming through the door. Most of the time, you will just take that theoretical measure.
The use of high-intensity training like this for weightlifting is a good idea at certain times of year. If you're very far out from competition, it could definitely be useful. Metabolically, general physical capacity and body composition are all probably useful aspects that you might garner from this. However, keeping it as a constant stream throughout the year probably wouldn't be a great idea. Now, you will adapt to it, obviously, but it is essentially resources that are being distracted away from training and that could be better used for the snatch and clean and jerk and squatting. So it'd be interesting to see if they actually keep this up, or if we'll ever find out if they'll keep this up closer to bigger competitions. Pretty far out. Very useful. Most weightlifters could do with this for 4 to 6 weeks once a year. You don't have to stop weightlifting necessarily, but a little bit of conditioning goes a long way. If you can reduce the rest time between sets, if you can increase your recovery between repetitions, between sets, between exercises and between sessions, you can then get better quality sessions in a shorter time frame, which is theoretically very useful for weightlifting. But it's very hard to convince weightlifters to do that. Here we've got Rakuei, who is one of our favourite Japanese weightlifters currently, and he clean and jerked 195 kilos for a new PB in competition, which is very notable, as an 81 kilo lifter. And I believe he is still... Okay, so last year's a junior, so that means he's turning 20 this year. So he's either 19 now or will be 20 soon, or is already 20.
The two areas of his technique I'm always drawn to, and they're somewhat on the edge of what you deem to be ideal, is just how quickly he gets his knees back and he keeps his shoulders over the bar. Like, it's a great illustration of how far you can go with sweeping the knees back, sweeping the barbell back, and hanging your shoulders out in front of the barbell during the first pull. And the second thing is the length of that split. So like, that back leg is nearly fully straight. He gets everything possible out of that split position. Every millimeter he can sneak underneath the bar, he's sneaking with that split. And it is great. It's just good to see somebody right at the edge of that kind of technical framework, where it's certainly not wrong, but he's right on the edge of kind of playing with that framework to make it as efficient and as best he possibly can.
Now here we've got Katrina Feklistova, who is lifting in somewhere in London, and she's snatching 105 kilos, so she's a Team GB lifter, and this 105 is massive. So she said back to pre-injury numbers, and the body feels good, and this certainly does look fantastic. Very, very strong pull. Very noticeable about this is the strong, stable catch position, so you can see she's really rigid there. Holding that kind of weight overhead is obviously massive, so having that in your back pocket, being able to be super stable under a barbell like that in the snatch, having the comfortability to be able to shift around a little bit. You can see she just moves her hips a little bit to the left and to the right, just making sure she's comfortable, and being able to be really confident and secure in that is really important in weightlifting. There's a lot of ways you can go about developing that, but having that is a noteworthy feature.
It's a really casual looking snatch, isn't it? Like, she stands up out of the bottom position so easily. There's no pressure on her at any point during the lift. This looks like a kind of easy opener somebody would hit at competition. I wonder how close it is to her PB. I wonder, she certainly looks like she has a lot more left in the tank there.
Here we've got, who's CF Tanya, I don't know her actual name, but she is a Russian weightlifter, and she's snatching 103 kilos here, similar again to the bottom position. We've got a really strong, stable bottom position, and having that makes such a big difference even psychologically. So if you know that when you get to the bottom of your snatches, you know that you're going to be catching them really rigid. You know, if you have a pain in your wrist, you're pain in your shoulder, or you're not that stable, or weightlifting, gods forbid, you get pinned by snatches, which I hope has happened to nobody watching this, but has happened to some people. That is not something you want. You want to be really confident that once you get under the snatch, you should be able to stand it up. Blagoyev, the best snatcher ever, the highest Sinclair snatcher, he snatched 195.5 kilos at 90 kilos body weight. Imagine that. He said the snatch is essentially just a pull and a snatch balance. So he said if you can snatch balance it, you just need to get under it and stand up. Now, that's easy for the goat to say, but the principle does remain the same. Having a strong overhead position is important. I think these two lifters are demonstrating that quite well.
I'd love to know what the state of amateur or developmental lifting is like in Russia at the moment. Obviously they have the ban. They're not going to be competing internationally. They didn't compete at the Olympics, and the problem is when that happens in most countries, your funding is just cut, and once funding's cut, you basically can have a kind of 10-year dead spot in a team or in a structure where those youth athletes who were coming through don't develop. Those coaches who would have helped them aren't there. They're not getting paid. And so you can get this massive fallout where even a ban for a short few years can have decades and decades of an effect. So I'd love to know if anyone's listening who does know what the effect of, or what those effects are, and what the state of Russian weightlifting is like at the moment. I'd love to hear it.
Here we've got Shohoyup, I can't really say his name, with a 290 kilo squat with some interpretive dance in between, and 140 kilo strict press. Just touching again on the South Koreans' use of strength. You know, they do not lack in that compartment. You don't ever see a South Korean lifter whose strength deficit is the issue. You don't see a place where their squat isn't strong enough, or their press or their back is lacking, and it's usually some other deficits that might be causing the issue, but they certainly don't leave the physical capacities that you need for weightlifting slide. And you can see that from their programming and how they approach their training, that they do push these. And a 290 squat is obviously something that a lot of weightlifters would aim for when needed, but we do see a lot of strong pressing with the South Korean team. We're huge fans of pressing for a variety of reasons, but most notably is stability in the overhead position of the split jerk or even the power jerk, should you choose to do such a sin. But the 140 kilo strict press is something you have to work towards. It's not something that just kind of you max randomly one day and, you know, they do put the very power in weightlifting.
I'm always surprised when I see a squat just how toed out he is. When you see him standing there with the barbell on the back after walking it out, it looks like he's going to be too toed out. There's no way his hips are going to be able to externally rotate enough to get his knees to track over his toes, and yet he seems to do it every single time. It's almost an optical illusion when you're watching these squats from the front. You'll see it here, almost a 45-degree angle out with both of the feet, yet he makes it work. He really tracks those knees out over the toes. Yet again, another interesting squat style, very hip dominant, very externally rotated in the squat, just like Lee Sang is.
Is the dancing style really hip dominant? It seems to be, Mr. Co-host Dara, so think about that.
Maybe there's a correlation there.
There could be a correlation. Next, we've got Blaine McConnell, no longer Story Pappy. He is now a professional.
I just saw that.
Yeah, Blaine McConnell.
Massive change.
With a 220 kilo front squat. So this matches his lifetime best. We've seen Blaine do things like a 200 kilo clean. We've seen him jerk 200 a few times. I know he wants to power clean 200 kilos this year. Whether he'll be able to do that will be very exciting to watch, and I hope he does, and I definitely think he has the capacity to do that. So that's kind of why we see him pushing that front squat again. I just want to reiterate some standards we've seen. We've been around for quite a number of years between us when we've seen quite literally thousands of athletes in terms of strength standards. And one of the numbers, kind of regardless of body weight, and it is a little bit unfair to the lighter lifters, is if you ever front squat 200 kilos or more, you're incredibly strong. So strong. Now, what the thing is that people won't tell you is the difference between a 200 kilo front squat and a 220 kilo front squat is massive. It's not the same as 180 to 220. 200 to 220 back squat isn't that big a difference, right? But the difference between a 200 to 220, let me tell you, is very notable. It is a really hard distance to cover. So if you've already surpassed that 200 kilo or 200 kilo mark, you're doing really well in terms of strength training. Even if you're fat. Blaine's not fat. 220.
I want to give you a bit more context around this as well, just in case you're one of those rare people who doesn't watch Blaine's training, whether it be on YouTube or on Instagram. Blaine is an absolute born and bred athlete. Mm-hmm. His jumps are absolutely sick. His broad jump triples, his sprinting, his acceleration work, and his lifting are all top tier, phenomenal to watch. It's very nice to look at and also technically really good. I would highly recommend following him, particularly if you're thinking down the hybrid road. And what I'm talking about here is hybrid in terms of sprinting, plyometrics, explosive work, and lifting at the same time. It doesn't really matter whether it's bodybuilding or powerlifting or weightlifting. If you're lifting weights in the gym and you want to sprint and be fast and be explosive, take a look at him. Take a look at what he does in training. It is unbelievable to watch, and he's genuinely a kind of standout unicorn athlete.
So here we've got Mike Adala, who is doing a 160 kilo axle bar single arm overhead squat. I'll be honest, the first time I saw the clip, I kind of thought it was fake because it just didn't look like he was holding 160 kilos overhead. He was incredibly secure with it, but there's actually his shtick, and he seems to do a lot of overhead events, like heavy overhead Turkish get-ups. So I'm inclined to believe it. I don't think it is fake. Obviously, if it was fake, we wouldn't have been included in the news show. Incredibly impressive, and I have to imagine this must be one of the heaviest overhead squats ever. I know he's saying world record, but there's obviously no federation that tests that I know of, but it probably is a fair statement to say that it is the heaviest overhead squat, certainly the heaviest overhead squat on camera.
It's interesting as well. I'd love to see how he got the bar overhead.
Oh yeah, that's true actually.
The clip starts with it, one hand in the centre of the barbell, and the barbell's overhead in a fully locked out position. I'd love to know if he walked it out from rack. Obviously, there's no judgment on this, absolutely no way. I'd just love to see the mechanics around getting that barbell overhead, whether it goes normal grip, puts the bar overhead and then shifts one into the middle. Whatever it is, it's an amazing feat of strength. But I always like to see those small kind of logistical things around these fringe events. The other thing here that comes to mind is the use of the axle bar. So in most cases when we look at an axle bar, we're thinking it as a detractor of performance, right? It's going to some way limit our performance. because the width of that barbell makes it more difficult to grip. Now, I'd hazard a guess at saying in the overhead position, that extra grip, that extra width might actually be beneficial just by reducing the pressure that's in your hand. So you have more surface area, you can enact just slightly smaller changes on it, and that barbell's impacting your hand and your wrist slightly less. I could be completely wrong in this, but from a kind of biomechanics and physics point of view, that axle bar is probably a benefit when you're doing crazy one-handed overhead movements like this.
That is real, isn't it? The way he slams it, it just looks kind of weightless as he's overhead, but then there seems to be weight. I think it is real.
No, I think it is real.
No offense, obviously, Mike. It's just left field.
Actually, that should be a compliment.
Next, we've got the man, the myth, the legend of benching a regular strength, or Julius Maddox, benching a 320 kilo bench press. Now, this is with competition plates, no elbow, sleeve, cuff things, which apparently add a lot more than you think. And paused rep. You know, Julius is really the standard of these heavier weights and leaving them in no doubt. And he's kind of the OG of massive bench pressing, and he's still at it. And this looks pretty routine.
Yeah, I can't. Julius is a shockingly strong human being. Every time we see him, every time you see him do a bench press, it blows your mind. Firstly, just the sheer size of him, how he can be that big. But then when you look at the actual weight that's on the barbell, calibrated plates oftentimes make things look a little bit less impressive. Particularly calibrated plates and a quite stiff power bar can make things look like they're not a million kilos when they in fact are. The one standout point in this is just how fast the barbell moves. So it's a good pause in the chest. It's a bit of a drive up with the hips. But that drive into the fully locked out position is insanely fast.
Mm-hmm. One notable thing is that when you're benching 320 kilos, you do need 3 units spotting you. You know, normally when most people are benching, one spotter is enough. Obviously, competitions will have more for safety's sake, and as they should. But when you're benching 320, you really do need a lot of people to help you for safety's sake, so just take note. Now, here's a very exciting post. This is John Hack, or Bilbo Swaggins, but you probably know him as John Hack, as you should, with a 365 kilo squat, or 804 pounds. Now, I believe this equals his best ever squat, and he's still 8 weeks out from the next competition. And I don't think John watches the news show, but does anyone know what weight he is at the moment, and is he going to cut weight for that next competition? I hope he's not. I just want to see him lift bigger weights at like 100 odd kilos. Anyway, this obviously 365 is gargantuan.
Yeah, the squat looks so good. This is up there with as good as we've ever seen him squat, particularly at these weights. I don't think we've seen any better squats from him. Very, very strong on the way up, incredibly controlled on the way down. Having goat on your shoes, I think nobody deserves that to be on the strap of their weightlifting shoes more than John Hack. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, he can have that.
Yeah,
he can have
it.
You can have that. That is fair. That's reasonable. Here we've got Nicholas Dupreez kind of on the comeback. So he took a bigger break last year. I believe he got like pneumonia, and then he wanted to take a bigger break from training because he felt he was quite fatigued. So we've got him here with a comp squat of 385 kilos for a triple. And obviously, as expected, he took some massive jumps in his progress. And we also have a 215 kilos by 5 bench press. So sticking with some massive benches. Nicholas Dupreez. I think I call him Dupreez there. It's Dupreez, South African giant, and not the only South African unit in powerlifting. Obviously, Colton, the limit breakers from South Africa as well. The set of 5 here at 215 is disgusting. That's the only way I can describe that.
So good. This is actually a really good bench press to look at if you're looking for technique and positions of the upper body. You'll see here it's not an overly wide grip, but he maintains that vertical forearm in both planes, right? So he's not tucking his elbows in, he's not flaring his elbows out. That forearm is essentially 90 degrees to the floor no matter what side you look at it from. Really nice stacked wrist position. That's a difficult position for many people to hit, particularly when they're starting off with the bench press. Getting that weight down through the heel of your hand, stacking down into that bone can be quite difficult for a lot of people, and this is an excellent illustration of what you should be doing.
Now, onto the athletics section of the news show. We've got the Bristol Bears female rugby team with some S&C, and we actually don't often see a lot of female S&C in rugby. The principles remain the same across both, of course. Generally, you'll see a bit of the All Blacks or the Australian female side of things, but we don't see much else from other teams. And we've got some really great S&C, as we usually see from Bristol Bears Rugby in general. We've got some big squats here, high bar, deep, 125, 128, 130 odd kilo back squats, moving really well across a variety of different body shapes, obviously. Then we've got the really excellent RDLs, or stiff-legged deadlifts, for the hamstring issue, which we looked at from one of their videos they made. Their coach was trying to emphasize the importance of slower eccentrics on stuff like Nordics, or hamstrings on, or stiff-legged deadlifts for the benefits of the hamstring and preventing the hamstring gunshot taking you out, which I think if anyone's ever ran the sniper, you'll know. It's really interesting with hamstrings is that you might feel a little bit and then it's just gone. It's so mean, isn't it? There's no need for it. You know, tendonitis, you're like, my knee's kind of sore.
Tendonitis is your own fault.
A month later, you're like, my knee is still sore.
Yeah.
3 months later, you're like, my knee's really sore. But with a hamstring, you're just sprinting along, happy. You think you're having a great time. You're fresh, you're athletic, and then someone just shoots you in the hamstring.
Bristol have some very, very good stuff out there in terms of their S&C, right? We obviously do reactions to a lot of people's training. We watch a massive amount of people's training. And whatever's going on over there, they seem to be doing things right. I'd love to know if there's a kind of collaborative effort between the male and the female side. I'd love to know who heads up the S&C, whether it's a head of performance who then looks after the S&C coaches. I'd like to know what that structure is like, because usually in a lot of high-performing teams or high-level professional sports teams, you'll have an S&C coach or a couple of S&C coaches for that team, and they don't really work with the others too much, right? So they might be chatting, but they won't really be writing programming over and back for each other. The academy coaches won't necessarily be working with the senior coaches too much. Senior coaches won't necessarily be working with the female team too much. But there seems to be a very good system going on in Bristol at the moment. I'd love to hear more about it, or more of the background behind it.
Next, we've got Max Denig, who is a javelin thrower, and we've seen some big hang power snatches from him, and this 145 kilos is a new PB. So we'd seen 140 from him before. Like, the first thing we'll see here, right, and it's always a thing we'll get, is the technique from track and field athletes often isn't ideal. There's a couple of things around that. The first is people will try and apply weightlifting style technique or standards to athletes. Yet when an athlete in weightlifting who is posting their training footage, people don't randomly just start commenting and start taking apart their technique. But for some reason, when there's athletes like this posting it, people immediately are experts and they'll say, oh, this is terrible. Like, is this technique very good in the traditional sense? No, it's not. If he's not getting injured, I assume he's been doing this for quite a while. We've obviously seen him doing the hang power snatches for ages. As I always say, if we were coaching them, would their technique look like this? No. But does it really matter? Not that much. Could he lift more weight with some better technique? Probably. Does he need to? It's probably unlikely. He's moving a fast weight. He's contracting. He's relaxing. Look, it goes up. I'm sure he's trying to work on his technique. He's probably doing his best. Just give the athletes a break.
It has to be said as well, right, that so there's some standout things, right, that you might change or you might want to alter. And that's where a lot of the commenters might come in. But he does a number of things very correctly. And when you look at what they are, it kind of counts for a lot. So the first thing is that extension at the top. He really is extending and putting as much power into that upward extension as he possibly can, which is 50% of the reason he's going to be doing snatches, or maybe even more, right? He's already ticking that box. He's getting what he needs out of the snatch rather than giving the snatch the best hope it possibly can. The second thing then is the foot movement's really good, right? Really strong foot movement, great placement on the floor, a bit of a hop forward. But in terms of that kind of catch position, his feet are in the correct position. And then it's followed up with a really good overhead position that's well locked out and stable. So he's ticking most of the boxes. I think a lot of the time when we look at throwers or we look at track and field people, we'll immediately point like X, Y, and Z, or they're bending their elbows, they shouldn't be doing this, or my coach told me not to do that. But you have to start looking at what they're doing right. And if they're getting most of those things right, they're going to be getting almost all the benefit from those lifts. And there's really no reason for them to be chasing down those tiny minutiae when they're getting 90% of the bang for their buck.
Next, we've got a clip of Khamzat Chimaev benching what appears to be 50 kilo dumbbells, which is obviously very, very impressive. And there's some talk in the comments if those are 50 pounds. I don't think an athlete of his prowess would be making 25s look that hard. I also think 25 kilo dumbbells would look that small if we're, or look that large, sorry, I should say, for 50 pounds. I'm pretty sure this is 50 kilos.
Also, we've seen his strength lifts before. He is very, very strong.
Yeah, he is doing strength training. It's not like he's just casually attempting this. He is someone who attempts strength training. So,
yeah. And like 50 kilo dumbbells are nothing to be sniffed at, but certainly they're by no means, it's not a 160 kilo single arm overhead squat. You know, they're certainly attainable for many, many people. An interesting thing with Khamzat is when you hear people he's fought against, and they talk about the strength once he grabs a hold of you. Like, there's literally no escaping it. Whether it's a body lock, whatever it is, he is known for being incredibly strong. Now, the seesaw dumbbell bench press is a difficult movement, right? There's a lot of stability going on there. There's a lot of work in the midline, a lot of work in the hips, a lot of work in the shoulders. And then you also have to bench press 50 kilos in each hand. The seesaw press is incredibly useful, particularly for people who don't have great coordination. I like them to do it. I think it really helps people align their midline and understand where they are in space a bit better. I also think it's a great auto-regulation tool. So if you have somebody who's constantly just going really heavy on the bench, get them onto a seesaw dumbbell bench press, and it can be a great factor, a great kind of challenge for them to hit.
Okay, next up we've got some clips of the Tulane football team, or the Green Wave, doing some deadlifts. We got a couple of the players doing 227, and about 235-ish, or 500 pounds, and 515 pounds. There's a couple of interesting things about this in terms of the technique that you might be wondering about, or is worthy of note in terms of the deadlift technique across those athletes. Now, when we're deadlifting conventionally for the most weight we can manage in a conventional deadlift, we want, in general, a lot of knees forward. We don't want the knees moving back too early. But there's a case to be made that stiff-legged variations or RDL variations are really useful for athletes for exposing the hinging pattern a little bit more and modifying that deadlift just a little bit. There's arguments for both, of course. If you want higher force production and heavier weights, you'd have a better quality technique in terms of conventional deadlifting. But if we're looking for athletic development in terms of the posterior development, you'll see a lot of them will shoot their ass up a little bit and move their knees back a small bit. They also do a lot of cleans as well, and their coach is clearly adept at helping them and coaching them. He's clearly a very good coach because they've got good quality cleans and techniques. So what's probably happening here is these are more of a clean deadlift style, so the knees shoot back, hips raise up, shoulders move in front slightly, which is more transferable to the clean. Incidentally, with that, you know, especially the first and the third rep, is that you get a bit more hamstring development, puts a bit more pressure on the posterior and the back, which is arguably more useful for sport. So it's not swings and roundabouts. What's the one with the birds? What's that saying?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either.
I definitely favour more hip hinging for athletes, right? A lot of athletes are going to be very short in the hip flexor. They're going to be more quad developed than they will be posteriorly developed. And the other thing is a lot of their training will develop their quads, right? So we're not really relying on the clean deadlift or the deadlift to develop their quads too much. They're already squatting, they're already split squatting, they're already doing Bulgarians. Their quads are going to get a lot of work done versus their hamstrings and glutes, which are going to be massively taxed on the field, yet not necessarily massively taxed in the gym. So I do like the idea of it. I also think when we look at athletes, and particularly college and high school age athletes, a lot of the time with their work in the gym, when they're doing hamstrings, it's difficult to get a lot of load through them, right? So they're doing hamstring Nordics, which can be quite difficult to achieve a lot of volume on because they're so difficult an exercise to do repeatedly. Or else they might be doing some sort of hamstring curl or something along those lines. In those cases, with the hamstring curl, you're getting a lot of volume in there, a lot of hypertrophy work, but you're not getting that massive bipedal central nervous system load and training done, which the deadlift can give you. And certainly when you look at American football, a lot of that fending you're going to be doing, a lot of that set play you're going to be doing is going to be in that kind of bent over position where your hips are already in flexion. You're going to have shoulders down, ass back, and it's certainly better to have a strong back there rather than a weak one.
Thanks for watching today's news show. If you'd like a stronger pull, check out the Sika pull or deadlift program on the Sika Strength app, available on iOS and Android. Great program, lots of success on that program among many others. Check out the Sika Strength newsletter as well, of course, in the links below. Thanks for watching today's news show. Thanks for everyone who sent in stuff for the news show.
Thanks, guys.